The death and burial of Mary I. It could be argued that Queen Mary I's demise was a consequence of profound emotional anguish, although medical assessments suggest that ovarian cancer was the true cause. Her life was marked by persistent sorrow and disappointment. Mary's early years were characterized by the affection of her father, who regarded her as the treasured pearl of his realm. However, her idyllic childhood came crashing down with the arrival of Anne Boleyn, which led to her father's pursuit of an annulment from her mother. Mary staunchly opposed her father's divorce and his rejection of papal authority, believing that this rejection equated to a denial of her Catholic faith. She could not accept the idea that her parents had never been married, viewing it as a lie that would condemn her soul. As a result, she was cast out of court, separated from her beloved mother Catherine, and denied the opportunity to see her, even in her final days. Eventually, Mary succumbed to her father's relentless pressure, but their relationship was irrevocably altered. When Mary ascended the throne, she viewed it as an opportunity to restore the England of her childhood, a kingdom of enchantment and prosperity. She hoped her marriage would mirror the happiness that she had once observed in her parents' union, before Henry had seduced by Anne. In fact, she had romantic notions about her husband before they even met, envisioning a return to Catholicism that she believed the English people would eagerly embrace. However, her expectations were met with deep disappointment. By 1558, Mary had become a shell of her former self. Abandoned by her indifferent husband after 2 failed pregnancies, she was bewildered by the persistence of heresy she had fought so valiantly to eradicate. Ironically, a woman who revered the martyrs of faith failed to recognize why executing heretics did not yield the desired results. As she lay in her deathbed at St. James's Palace, silence enveloped her, her court having deserted her in favour of her sister Elizabeth, who was destined to become the next queen. This abandonment left a lasting impression on Elizabeth, who would later hesitate to name an heir, recalling how the court had turned its back on Mary in her final moments. With her strength waning, Mary's hours became increasingly filled with sleep and her clarity faded. Yet she managed to draft her will, and ultimately she could not bring herself to name Elizabeth as her successor, stating only that the throne should pass according to the law. Some speculate that she died of tympany, while others attributed her death to the heavy sighs of her sorrowful heart. Her council, noticing her sighs and eager to offer comfort, feared that she mourned her husband's absence. When asked about her distress, she replied, "That may be one cause, but it's not the greatest wound that pierced my oppressed mind," though she withheld the specifics. Mary had offered a lady's pious advice and envisioned angelic children frolicking around her, singing joyfully. Mary's illness prompted a nationwide sense of mourning, yet she bore it all with remarkable patience. She reassured those who grieved, sharing her dreams of angelic children and encouraging them to maintain a holy fear of God, which would protect them from evil and temptation. She urged them to understand that whatever befalls them is by divine permission, instilling confidence that God would ultimately turn it to good. Throughout her life, Mary endured constant trials, experiencing little joy, and save for her efforts to restore Catholicism to her realm. During her brief reign, she faced numerous conspiracies against her, fueled by malice towards God's truth. She commanded her council and servants to remain steadfast in the Catholic faith, and with her final moments spent in prayer, listening to spiritual lessons, and receiving the sacraments of the Church, she departed this world on the 17th of November, 1558. On the morning of her passing, she attended Mass in her chamber, a daily ritual that she never missed, even as death approached. Despite her condition, she participated with fervour and devotion, responding attentively to the priest's words. When the priest proclaimed the Agnus Dei, she clearly and fervently answered each invocation. As the priest prepared to consume the sacred host, she adored it with reverence, closing her eyes, and peacefully surrendered her soul to God. According to the Duchess, who recounted this moment with tears in her eyes, the last vision Mary experienced was of her Saviour, ensuring her a blessed transition to his heavenly presence. In reality, the last moments of Mary I were far from the grandeur one might imagine. She received her final rites just before midnight on the 16th of November 1558, and the last Mass was held in her chamber at dawn the following morning. After this, Mary slipped into eternal sleep, passing away sometime between 5 and 7 a.m. According to one account, her death was so serene that it went unnoticed for some time, leaving the exact moment shrouded in ambiguity. Once the news of her passing broke, the few remaining courtiers rushed to be the first to inform Elizabeth. Sir Nicholas Throgmorton, in his haste, removed a ring from Mary's finger. Reports vary on whether it was her coronation or betrothal ring, and presented it to Elizabeth as proof of the Queen's demise. However, he was disheartened to learn that the council had already conveyed the news, making his efforts redundant. Mary's body was entrusted to her local attendants, who prepared her for burial in a manner consistent with the practices of the time. As undertakers were not yet common in Tudor England, her physicians and household officers took on the solemn task of embalming her, providing their final service to the Queen, and unlike her mother, Catherine of Aragon, who had been embalmed by her chandler, Mary's own team carried out the procedure. Her surgeons carefully disemboweled her, removing her heart and lungs. The clerk of the spicery and the chandlers filled the cavity with spices and herbs before wrapping her body in cerecloth, a wax-coated fabric used for burial shrouds. Mary was buried in a nun's habit, though given her strong attachment to her husband, this seems very unlikely. The cloth-wrapped body was then enclosed in lead sheets by the sergeant plumber before being placed in a coffin covered in purple velvet and adorned with lace and gilded nails, an arrangement that Mary would have favoured. Following the customary practices of the time, her removed organs were interred separately. Mary's heart was stored in a silver casket lined with velvet and buried in the Chapel Royal of St. James's, while her entrails are thought to have been laid to rest at Westminster Abbey. In 1670, during the funeral ceremonies for General Monk, a royal vault was opened, revealing two urns, one belonging to Queen Mary and the other to Queen Elizabeth. Upon examination, Busby noted that the contents of Mary's urn resembled a red substance akin to mortar, but with less moisture than that of Elizabeth's. For over 20 days, Mary lay in state at St. James's Palace, surrounded by flickering candles, and Elizabeth ordered that the highest honours be given to her sister, mirroring the funeral rites conducted for their father, though with a significant difference. Mary's ceremonies were conducted entirely within the Catholic tradition, and her ladies maintained a constant vigil, praying at her coffin and offering masses for her soul. The funeral commenced on the 13th of December, with Mary's coffin adorned and placed upon the elaborately decorated hearse drawn to Westminster Abbey. A wooden effigy dressed in one of Mary's gowns and holding a sceptre, while wearing a crown, rested atop the coffin. Due to the rudimentary nature of embalming at the time, the effigy took centre stage throughout the month-long funeral, necessitating a lifelike representation. Elizabeth spared no expense in decorating the chapel for the service. The chapel was draped in black cloth, the altar was embellished with purple velvet, and a canopy of the same material was suspended above it. A hearse, square and surrounded by 46 massive candles, weighing 20 pounds each, was beautifully crafted with crowns and roses. Below the candles, a valance made of sarcenet bore Mary's name in gold letters, surrounded by a golden fringe. Within this valance, another layer of buckram with black silk fringe provided further decoration. The hearse was lavishly decorated with various symbols, and beneath it lay a taffeta majesty with gilded dome and the 4 evangelists positioned at each corner. The railings around the hearse were lined with broad black cloth, and the ground beneath was similarly draped. 15 stools covered in fine black cloth stood around the hearse, with purple velvet cushions atop each. An altar was positioned to the left of the choir, draped in purple velvet and adorned with church ornaments. As the chapel was meticulously prepared, the sergeant of the vestry was instructed to guard it until the royal corpse was brought down. Some accounts suggest that Elizabeth hinted at her displeasure if the court failed to attend Mary's funeral, leading to a grand procession that featured the highest nobles in the land. The Bishop of Worcester, accompanied by other bishops and the Queen's Chapel, moved to retrieve Mary I's body. While the chapel remained in the great chamber, the bishops entered the chamber housing the deceased. They censed the body and recited various prayers before it was lifted by 8 gentlemen. The procession was arranged in a solemn order, a cross followed by white branches carried by boys in surplices, then the chapel members, and finally the gentlemen, squires and chaplains of lower rank. Officers with torches lined the sides as the procession made its way. Then the overseers, earls, executors, and kings of arms. The body itself was covered by a pall of gold tissue, with a matching crown placed at its side. 2 noblemen, including the Marquis of Winchester and the Earl of Westmoreland, touched the body, while a canopy of purple velvet, supported by 6 gentlemen, sheltered it. The chief mourner, Lady Margaret, Countess of Lennox, was accompanied by the Earl of Huntingdon and Viscount Montague, with her train carried by Lady Catherine Hastings and the Vice-Chamberlain. Behind her followed 14 additional mourners, paired off, and then the other ladies and gentlemen, concluding with the guards. The funeral services were as elaborate and drawn out as customary for Tudor royals. At last, after the extensive ceremonies, Mary was laid to rest in the chapel built by her grandfather, Henry VII. The body was carried to the designated chapel for burial, where the Archbishop and other bishops conducted the final rites. As prayers were offered, 4 gentlemen, ushers, removed the pall from the body, which was then lowered into the grave, with the Archbishop casting soil upon it. Noblemen, including the Lord Treasurer and the Lord Chamberlain, broke their staffs over their heads and tossed the pieces into the grave as a mark of respect. Once the burial was completed, the Archbishop and bishops disrobed from the ceremonial vestments. Following the burial, the noblemen and prelates gathered, joined by the officers of arms. Garter, the principal king of arms, along with 2 bishops, announced the new queen, proclaiming, "Of the most high, most puissant, and most excellent Princess Elizabeth, by the grace of God, Queen of England and Ireland. Defender of the faith, God save the Queen Elizabeth." The noblemen raised their hands and caps in salute as trumpets sounded from the road loft. After this declaration, the attendees departed to the abbot's house for dinner. The extravagant ceremony cost over £7,662, a staggering sum, equivalent to millions today. Elizabeth insisted on this elaborate display, as any slight to a Tudor monarch would also reflect poorly on her own reign. Meanwhile, Mary's widowed husband, Philip II of Spain, expressed his sorrow in a letter to his aunt. He wrote to the Queen, "My wife is dead. May God have received her in his glory. I felt a reasonable regret for her death. I shall miss her even on this account." He instructed his representative in England to attend the funeral, ensure the collection of his jewels left behind during his last visit. Among these was La Peregrina, the famous pearl that he had given Mary on their wedding day, which would later gain fame as part of Elizabeth Taylor's estate. In her will, Mary requested that her mother, Catherine of Aragon, be exhumed from her modest tomb in Peterborough Cathedral and reinterred alongside her, with a proper monument to honour both. Despite this heartfelt wish, Mary had not taken steps during her 5-year reign to arrange for her mother's burial to be upgraded from that of a dowager princess. Could she truly have expected Elizabeth to grant Catherine the honours of a queen, given that Elizabeth's own legitimacy hinged on Catherine's denouncement? Ultimately, the tomb was never built, but that should not be taken too seriously. Elizabeth appeared to avoid creating tombs altogether. She never honoured Anne Boleyn with a proper marker for her unmarked grave beneath St. Peter ad Vicula, nor did she construct a monument for her father or her brother. Even Elizabeth herself did not have a tomb built until James I took charge after her death. Mary's grave remained unmarked for nearly 50 years, and accounts indicate that rubble from altars destroyed during the Reformation was piled atop her resting place. Upon Elizabeth's death, she was temporarily interred alongside her grandfather, Henry VII, until James could complete her grand tomb. Once finished in 1606, James exhumed Mary and placed her alongside Elizabeth. The tomb bears Elizabeth's carved marble effigy with her achievements inscribed in Latin along the sides. However, an inscription on the lower portion acknowledges Mary's presence. Partners in throne and grave, here we sleep, Elizabeth and Mary, sisters in the hope of resurrection. Both coffins were interred in the same vault beneath the chapel floor, with Elizabeth's coffin resting atop Mary's, once more placing Mary in a subordinate position to her half-sister. The historical memorials of Westminster Abbey recount that Elizabeth and Mary's tomb was opened once during the search for James I's remains. The excavations revealed 2 coffins within a narrow vault beneath Elizabeth's monument. It was evident that these contained both Elizabeth and Mary. The upper coffin, larger and shaped more distinctly like a body, was reminiscent of Queen Mary of Scots' resting place. Despite some decay, the area revealed the Tudor badge, a double rose, along with the initials ER and the date 1603 inscribed on the lid. This intimate vault, containing the 2 Tudor sisters, partners in life and death, was a striking contrast to the chaotic decay found in the Stuart vault nearby. Their resting place, serene and dignified, provided a stark reminder of the tumultuous legacy they shared. May they rest in peace while we walk the generations around their strife and courage under these restless skies. Death of Queen Elizabeth I. The iconic monarch of the Elizabethan era became the epitome of beauty standards during the 16th century. Her pale and flawless complexion was revered as a symbol of nobility and perfection, setting the benchmark for feminine allure. However, this ideal of beauty came at a grave cost. Elizabeth's pursuit of perfection led her to the use of cosmetics containing toxic substances such as lead and mercury, which not only harmed her skin, but potentially contributed to her eventual demise. One of the most prominent cosmetics that she used was a makeup composed of lead and vinegar, which she applied to her face and neck, resulting in a ghostly appearance that became her signature look. Furthermore, Elizabeth adorned her lips with a stain, which was made from a mineral containing mercury, giving her the iconic red lips depicted in numerous portraits. Over time, the prolonged use of these toxic substances caused irreversible damage to her skin. The lead corroded her complexion, while mercury poisoning led to symptoms such as memory loss and depression. Despite being aware of the risks, Elizabeth persisted in wearing her makeup for extended periods of time, exacerbating the harm inflicted upon her skin. Even the process of removing her makeup posed further dangers, potentially exposing her to additional mercury. The tragic consequences of Elizabeth's pursuit of beauty are underscored by the accounts of individuals who praise the effectiveness of mercury-based makeup removers, unaware of the harm that they were causing. These removers, while leaving the skin feeling soft, were actually stripping away layers of tissue, causing significant damage. Additionally, Elizabeth's early years were marred by a battle with smallpox, which left her with permanent scars on her face. In a society where appearance was heavily scrutinized, Elizabeth went to great lengths to conceal her blemishes, fearing that they would diminish her stature as a ruler. Throughout her life, Elizabeth employed various strategies to maintain her image of youthful perfection. She prohibited unflattering portraits of herself and relied on skilled artists to depict her in a flawless manner, as evidenced by the famous Darnley portrait. However, the realities of aging proved inevitable, with Elizabeth resorting to wearing wigs to conceal her thinning hair. Despite her efforts, the Earl of Essex's revelation of her balding head in 1599 served as a stark reminder of the passage of time. In her final months, Elizabeth's health declined rapidly, yet she adamantly refused to rest, fearing it would signify her demise. Instead, she endured standing for long hours, supported by pillows strategically placed by her attendants. On the 24th of March 1603, Queen Elizabeth I passed away, with potential causes of death including cancer or pneumonia, exacerbated by years of exposure to toxic cosmetics. The aftermath of her death was marked by speculation and controversy, with accounts of her body allegedly bursting open in her coffin due to the buildup of noxious vapours. While the exact cause of Elizabeth's death remains uncertain, her tragic fate serves as a poignant reminder of the dangers inherent in the pursuit of beauty. The use of toxic cosmetics dates back centuries, with evidence from ancient civilizations like the Romans, yet their poisonous nature was not officially recognized until after Elizabeth's death. Despite advancements in understanding the risks associated with certain beauty practices, the quest for beauty at any cost persists to this day. The story of Queen Elizabeth I's beauty regime serves as a cautionary tale, highlighting the enduring legacy of pain and sacrifice in the name of beauty throughout human history. The funeral of Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth I, one of the most iconic figures in British history, left behind a legacy that has intrigued and inspired generations. Her passing marked the end of an era, and her funeral was a spectacle that drew masses of all walks of life, reflecting her impact on her subjects and the wider world. On the 28th of April, a little over a month after her death, Elizabeth I's final journey through the streets of London to Westminster Abbey was not just a procession, but a vivid tableau of the era she dominated. The events of that day and the subsequent handling of her resting place weave a fascinating narrative about royalty, remembrance, and the respect accorded to one of England's most formidable rulers. Elizabeth I's funeral took place on the 28th of April, a little over a month after she died. Her body was carried through King Street, now called Whitehall, in a large parade all the way through to Westminster Abbey, where she was buried. Hundreds of people joined the procession, ranging from ordinary men and women to trumpeters, Elizabeth's household staff, knights and nobles. The Lady Marquis of Northampton led the procession as the chief mourner. Westminster was packed with people everywhere, on the streets, in houses, and even on rooftops. Everyone came to watch the funeral, and there was a lot of crying and sadness, unlike anything people had seen before. One of the interesting things about the funeral was the drawings that showed what the procession looked like. There was a model of the Queen, dressed in her official robes, complete with a crown and sceptre, resting on her coffin. The coffin was draped in purple velvet and pulled by 4 black-dressed horses. Above the coffin, a canopy was held up, and noblemen carried 12 banners around it, representing the symbols of the House of York, but not those of the House of Lancaster. Elizabeth I died and was buried with much ceremony. Her funeral service was led by Dean Andrews, and she was initially laid to rest in a vault with her grandparents, Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, at Henry VII's chapel. But in 1607 her remains were moved to be with her half-sister Mary, marking the unusual case of a Protestant princess buried next to her Catholic sister. This move cost 46 shillings and 4 pence, according to Westminster Abbey's records. Elizabeth's successor, King James I, spent quite a lot, about £1,485, more than a nobleman's yearly income, on a white marble monument for her. Interestingly, this monument was smaller than the one he later made for his own mother, Mary, Queen of Scots. Originally, the statue on Elizabeth's monument was painted in vibrant colours, and even the lions at its corners were gilded, though no colour remains today. There's more to discover about Elizabeth's resting place thanks to Arthur Stanley from the 1880s. He was allowed by Queen Victoria to examine all the tombs in the Abbey, a place usually closed to the public. Stanley's exploration revealed insights into the hidden crypts, including the one of the Tudor tombs. In his search, Stanley found a narrow vault with 2 coffins stacked, one on top of the other. He described Elizabeth's coffin in detail. It was well preserved, decorated with a Tudor rose, her initials ER, and the year 1603. The coffin was crafted from oak and elm, and parts of its red silk velvet covering still clung to the wood. This find is a unique glimpse into the final resting place of Elizabeth I, lying directly above her sister Mary. It's a remarkable story that sheds light on the hidden history beneath Westminster Abbey. Thanks to the efforts of Queen Victoria and Mr. Stanley, this adventure into the past is just the beginning, as there are more secrets to uncover about the royal burials in future explorations. The grandeur and solemnity of Queen Elizabeth I's funeral procession, her burial, and the subsequent discovery of her final resting place offer a window into the rituals and reverence of royal funerals. The touching story of her reburial alongside her half-sister Mary I and the creation of a monument in her memory highlights the complex relationships and political dynamics of the Tudor period. Thanks to historical accounts and the diligent work of historians, we gain a deeper understanding of the significance of these events. These explorations into the past not only honour Queen Elizabeth I's memory, but also enrich our understanding of the cultural and historical context of her reign. As we continue to uncover details about the royal burials at Westminster Abbey, each discovery adds a new layer to the rich tapestry of British history.